I'm not a reviewer, I'm a very naughty boy. Let's talk about Monty Python's The Life of Brian.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, can you please let the people know what we're going to be discussing or debating today?
So, this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are talking about Monty Python's The Life of Brian from 1979, which I've seen a bunch of times and you guys have just seen for the first time. So, The Life of Brian is a biblical comedy movie from the legendary Monty Python comedy troupe. It's widely regarded as one of the best comedies ever made. It follows the story of Brian, who is born in Judea at the same time as Jesus. And his life kind of parallels the events of Jesus' life. And he gets first entangled with a Judean resistance group, and then he is mistaken for a Messiah, and the plot unfolds from there. So, what did you guys think of The Life of Brian?
Firstly, this is the second blasphemous movie that we've done in the past 2 weeks, and I was thinking of my boy Jonathan again as I was watching it. I'm going to politely say this is not for me, and I think
Really?
the minute I saw Monty Python, I said, okay, this is gonna be an absolute drag for about an hour and a half, and it was like literally two minutes in, I was like. Like I just kind of felt myself like deflated, like this is just not for me, and like it never really picked up for me at all in terms of like any of the jokes. And the reason I say it's not for me because I get that people love this type of humor. I get that people like love Monty Python and their shows, etc. But it's just not my comedy style. And then you mix that in with like the whole biblical aspect of it as well, where you obviously I'm aware of it. I don't kind of like know it or follow it too well or anything like that, and I know some of the stories, but I'm not too well versed. And I think for about 5 minutes, that had my interest, especially when they're like speaking and like they're at the back and they're kind of like shouting and like people are like can't even hear what's going on and they have like that small argument or whatever. I was like, oh, it's interesting, kind of seeing just like the average person's life within this setting. But then that quickly lost its allure for me as well, and I was just like, I'm just not digging the setting. I'm not digging the jokes. I'm not digging the story and how it's playing out at all. Because it's very much non-traditional as well in terms of what was going on. And it's kind of, it's comedy in it, and it's either you like the comedy or you don't. And that's going to sort of really hinge on whether you like the movie or not. And for me, it's just not for me. And that's kind of how, like, the easiest way to put it without absolutely calling this an absolute abomination of comedy, which I kind of feel it is. But I feel respectful to people and say it's just not for me. It's just not my style.
I have a feeling this conversation is going to go differently than I thought. So, before we go into that, Jonathan, what's your take on Life of Brian?
That was funny. So what I'm gonna say is, surprisingly, this was a decent watch and it was funny. At times, a lot, like quite a few times. What I will say is, so the first half, I actually liked the third act. I didn't like so much because obviously it got to the point where he was. That's where you're seeing personal opinion. Obviously, the message that was kind of like portrayed at the end. That's clearly a message I don't agree with. But I found the jokes funny because I think mainly when they were kind of like taking the piss out of the Romans and like mainly the environment rather than Jesus himself is what I found funny, and just the way that they were performing. And I think some of the jokes, it's not necessarily that the joke. I think for me it was more so moments that I found funny, especially with the whole I don't forgot his name, but the Roman king or prince, whatever, with his lisp. That was funny. I would say the reaction to him I found funny. There's other moments we'll speak about. So I think for me it was moments and how he'll kind of like taking the piss out of, the environment rather than Jesus itself. Like I said, it was a decent, funny watch. I'm not mad at what I watched.
All right. So just to put this movie into a little bit of context, this came out in 1979, coming off the success of The Holy Grail. And they were looking for another topic to kind of satirize. And they came up with essentially a biblical story. The movie was so controversial, it was protested and picketed wherever it was shown. And it was banned in a whole bunch of countries for much of the 80s. So in some countries for well over a decade. In the UK, it was banned, I think, in 11 councils. Like in mostly Catholic countries, it's been banned or restricted or basically just condemned as blasphemous. Although critics liked it apparently at the time, and now it's sitting at 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, which basically means pretty much everybody loves this, and its reputation is for being one of the best comedies ever made. So, Hervé, since you didn't like this, which side of those two can you sympathize with more?
Best best comedy of all time. Wow. We need to rethink what people think comedy is, to be honest. What was your question, sorry? Which side do I sympathize with?
Which of those two do you sympathize with more? The people calling it blasphemy or the people calling it the best comedy of all time?
The people calling it blasphemy, because I can't condone this being classed as the best comedy of all time. I can name 10 off the top of my head of comedies I found much funnier than this.
You'd never seen this, right? But did you not know the phrase, "He's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy," or Bigos Dickus, or the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea? Like, these are things that kind of are in the lexicon, right? Like, these are things people will quote. How can you go through life not hearing about that?
This kind of reminds me of the movie Magazine Dream, and I don't know if everyone watched it because we didn't review it, but there's a scene in there where like there's like a really famous like bodybuilder, and he's on a date, and he's just like flabbergasted that this girl doesn't know who the bodybuilder is, because it's like he's such like an icon in his world. And I feel like that about this movie, because like everything that you've just mentioned there, I've never heard of it. Like never heard of it, never come across it, never been quoted anywhere or by anyone around me that I'm even like aware of. And again, I think that's just more environment and like type of comedy that I kind of grew up with, and type of comedy that people around me grew up with. And like I've come across people that like really like Monty Python. I say people, maybe like two people in my lifetime that really like Monty Python. So I think it's no surprise that I don't know it. But again, this is why I say that it's just not for me, because I don't want to like shit on it, because there's clearly like a huge fan base for this, and there's clearly a whole bunch of people out there that this is their ideal comedy, and this is sort of what they find funny. It's not for me to say that this is like terrible for everyone, but it's just like it's not what I'm used to. And even in watching this, I couldn't become accustomed to enjoying this type of comedy.
Were there any parts about it you did enjoy? Like, is there like where is it, okay, I don't like this on balance, but this sequence is pretty good? Like anything like that, or is it just all nonsense? You didn't like the thing where Brian goes out to write "Romans Go Home" on the wall at night because he's trying to join this resistance movement, and then a centurion catches him and he makes him correct his grammar and write it 100 times. Like, I never even took Latin classes, but like for some reason that kind of worked for me.
Do you know what it is? I think even in the small parts that I found some humor in, I feel like the jokes go on for too long. I feel like they're overextended, the jokes, and they like really hammer down that this is the joke that we're making, and it goes on for too long. I think that's one of it. I think the biggest dickus one is another one where I think at first it was like, oh, this is like decent compared to everything else that I've seen in this movie. But then it goes on for too long, and they overplay it and they overstuff it, and it's like, I'm tired of it now. Like, please, can we move on to something else? If you're kind of asking areas that I enjoyed, I think that's one of them. Like the biggest one. The Latin one was okay for a little bit. I'm trying to think. I'm really hard pressed to think of like much in this that I was like, oh, this is no. Actually, I'll take it back. There was one where the kind of Romans burst into the house and everyone just hides behind stupid stuff. I think that one was like okay, but then again, you see they overplay it because they do it like 3 times in a row. It just like overstays its welcome. I say a lot, most of the jokes, and I think that's just like style, and I think that's like the style here where they like play up to what the joke is. But for me, it's fine at first, and then it's just like, okay, it's too much.
It's just not your thing at all. Okay.
Yeah, it's just, and it's just one of those things. And do you know what's funny is I was having a conversation earlier today at work with someone that doesn't like any sport at all, like zero sports whatsoever. And I think Daniel, I don't know whether you like any sports. I know you don't like football. I don't know if you like any sports at all, but
I'm the same way. It bores me to tears.
yeah, but like that blew my mind. I was like not even like gymnastics or like ice skate, like nothing in the Olympics or anything like that, and it like completely blew my mind that like someone could just like completely hate or like not be interested in a certain thing. But yeah, I kind of feel like the same with this, where there's just like nothing about it that like really grabs me, that makes me want to watch it, that entertains me in any type of way, that makes me want to like think like, oh, I'll put that on, or even like not, oh, I'll put that on, or I didn't really want to watch that, but actually I kind of had a half decent something. It's just like, no, like you, this is just killing me. This is killing my soul watching this, and I feel like I'm getting more harsh the more we kind of talk about this movie, but I was just like, when is this over? And I feel like we should switch to Jonathan at some point, because I feel like I'm like really being harsh on this, and Jonathan actually somewhat enjoyed it. So
Yeah, so Jonathan, what's your favorite joke?
I don't know his character. It was either Roman. Like I know what he was, obviously biblically wise, but
Julius Caesar, is it
yes,
the Emperor Julius
yeah,
Caesar?
This was Pilate, the governor of Judea.
yeah. So obviously his moments with the list, obviously when he's talking to all of the people, and they're egging him on, saying, "Oh no, we want you to release this prisoner and that prisoner." Like, obviously, really that they're laughing at his list. That was funny. Obviously, and the moment where he's speaking with the
Yeah,
guards was all indoors. That was funny. And
like he can't pronounce ass, right?
yeah,
And he asks the Romans had a tradition where once a year they would release a prisoner as a sign of goodwill, and he's asking the crowd who should they release, and they keep saying names with lots of ass in it, so he
yeah,
can't pronounce it. And
yeah,
then his friend Biggest Dickus tries to be helpful, and he has a lisp, and the first name on his list is Silas the Syrian assassin,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
he tries to say that, and it just doesn't work, and the crowd is just rolling on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also the way like Brian's performance as well was funny is because he sounds very proper. So whenever I think especially when he was on the cross, I don't know who some I think he was calling someone bastards, but a lot of the times when he says it, I found that very comical as well. So
Mhm.
the way that he just sounds very like when posh people swear, British boss people swear, I always find it funny. So him having that personality is what made it. I was like, okay, I was like, this is it's pretty good. Of course, I wouldn't watch it again, but it was funny for the moment. I was like, okay, I see what they're trying to do. Like I said, the ending wasn't for me, but before everything that was happening before that, I was like, this was a decent, funny watch.
What was it about the ending that didn't work for you?
When the whole crowd was outside his house, and then he had that speech about you can do what you want, you don't have to follow someone. Roughly around, pretty much the opinion was, listen, what I took from it was live your life. You don't need to worship God in a way. You know what I'm saying? Pretty much denouncing religion in a way with the message that he was speaking to the crowd. So that's why for me, I was like, of course, I want to disagree with that. And it felt like it was building up to that. So that's why I say from the first two acts I could enjoy, but then when it got to that, I was like, okay, this is where it feels personal. Obviously, this is where, and I'm like I said, I don't disagree with people's personal opinions, but you can't expect me to agree with it. So that's why I kind of like just clocked out a bit. There were still moments in the third act which was funny, especially when he was calling people bastards when you thought he was going to get saved, and then even the scene where people came to release Brian, and everyone on the cross says that they were Brian, and then one of them who they did release is like, I'm not Brian, you Romans can't take a flipping joke. That was funny. That part was funny. But yeah, so when it got to the third act, that's when it became personal. Like this ain't for me. So I kind of clocked out. I wasn't really into it when it got to there. But everything before that, I was like, okay, this is funny.
And we'll get to the religion bit in a bit because this is obviously the big topic of this. But you were fine with the crucifixion.
It's not that I was fine with the crucifixion. They weren't taking the piss out of Jesus. It was more so Brian. So I'm like, okay. So I didn't feel offended in that part.
Let's lean into that. So has a reputation as being an incredibly blasphemous movie. It's about being all about attacking religion, right? But I think first of all, I think both of you hadn't expected much, right? Like you didn't have very specific expectations. But I'm assuming as you started watching it, you realize, okay, this is the religion one, right? Like this is the one where Monty Python starts taking the piss out of religion. When you watched it, did it unfold the way you thought it would be, and was it the way you thought it would be, or was it something else? And what was your reaction?
So the first half, no. That's why I thought going into it they were going to just take the piss out of religion. But then the first half it wasn't like that. I didn't take it like that. I said, oh no, they're taking the piss out of God's like Jesus' environment rather than taking the piss out of Jesus himself. So I was like, that's why I enjoyed it. Then it got to the third part. I was like, okay, I expected that third part, but in general, no.
Yeah, I think the same. Obviously, it kind of starts off with the whole Bethlehem and Jesus' birth, etc. In that, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I see what we're probably gonna do, what we're probably doing here in terms of like, this kind of like imitator or like mimicking the life of Jesus. But yeah, then it became like heavily about the Romans and sort of that setting, the setting around that period in sort of time. The third act is like the movie that I was expecting. So then when it started to come about, I was like, oh, okay, like now we're like starting to lean into this. I think we were just kind of like putting stuff in place or like kind of telling the story in like a bit of a roundabout way. And eventually we kind of got to where I thought the movie was going to go. In terms of it like being blasphemous, I can really see how people were offended and how people kind of rejected the movie in like certain councils or like Catholic places, because with religion, and we'll probably get into this a lot more as well, is like it's sacred and it's like, you know, to the person that's following it. I don't know. It's almost like, you know, with satirizing it, it's almost mocking that person for like believing in this or like for having that sort of particular opinion. Where I'm like, I'm very much just like let people be. Like you kind of don't need to tell people how to live their lives, etc. Funny enough, because that's like one of the things in the movie is like, you know, not telling people how to live life. But I don't know, with like anything, like taking the mick out of something that is really important to someone. I don't know. I find it distasteful, and I feel like, you know, it's not just not funny. It's not comedic.
Just to add to that real quick, I just want to say I don't think it would have got banned if they didn't add the third act. I think the first two acts alone, if the movie was like that throughout, then I don't think there would have been an issue. Maybe people have offended even with, you know, the whole, you know, subject matter. I think Act 3 was what got it banned. Everything else, because when I was watching it, I was like, okay, why would this get banned? Like, I understand that, like, especially with the first scene, I was like, okay, they're getting into sticky territory, but then that's when they kind of digressed and it was more so about everything else rather than Jesus himself. So that's why I was a bit confused when I was watching. I was like, wait, why would this get banned? And we even spoke about this behind the scenes, and I was like to you, I even said to you, they're not taking the piss out of God. Like, I'm a bit confused.
So when you read what the Monty Python guys have been saying about this movie, and this is like an almost 50-year-old movie, there have been a lot of interviews, there's been a lot of discussion about this movie, and they will swear up and down that this is not a blasphemous movie, this is a heretical movie. And what they mean by that is that they do not attack either God or Jesus or anyone's belief. They are criticizing the behavior of religious people when it comes to things like crowds or people getting worked up about things or getting too much into what it is they believe in. So famously, when they were writing this movie, they kind of started out with Jesus, right? That was like in Jesus' teachings as described in the Bible, and they didn't find anything to satirize because they basically said, yeah, this pretty much checks out. These are broadly good things. So what are we going to criticize or what are we going to satirize? And one of the examples of this is one of the first scenes is the Sermon on the Mount, right, where Jesus is preaching his sermon and people are listening, and Jesus just off blurry in the background. You can barely hear him. You can just hear that it is the Sermon on the Mount, right? And we are seeing the reaction of people to it. And there's things in here like they keep mishearing what he's saying, and they keep getting into arguments over different people having different interpretations. And there's the famous cheesemaker jokes where they mishear blessed are the peacemakers as blessed are the cheesemakers. And then they have a theological debate about it and settle on clearly this is an allegory and it refers to all professions in the dairy industry. It's not to be taken literally. Right? So that is the joke, right? They're not actually making fun or attacking the actual teachings. They are attacking how people receive them and deal with them, and often take them way too seriously to the point where it creates divisions between people. I think that is the crux of what this movie is saying, right? It's not a broad spectrum attack on Christianity or on anybody, like on any specific beliefs. It's how do people tend to handle this stuff.
I understand where you're coming from, and I would understand that with, like I said, I keep referring to the first half, first two acts, because that makes sense. It's just the third act, I think, that would kind of contradict what you're saying, because there clearly was a message behind that, and it's not even like it was a message where, you know, you have to look in between the lines or nothing. He literally said it, so it was like, okay. And with everything that happened before that line is when he's talking to the crowd and he says the whole line about I think Hervey even said it a second ago. I forgot what
You
the line
don't
was
need
about.
to like follow. You don't need to be following people. Like just live your own lives. Like you don't need to be a follower.
So the line is, Brian says, you should all think for yourselves. And the crowd says in unison, yes, we think for ourselves. And Brian says, you are all individuals. And the crowd says in unison, yes, we are all individuals. And then one guy says, I'm not.
Yeah, I heard that. That was funny. Well, that speech there, that's what told me, okay, there's a message clearly behind this film.
Mhm.
It had to, because that means if that wasn't like the main message of the film, then kind of like everything that happened before that was kind of like for no reason, if that makes sense. There has to be a build up to something when it comes to any film. I just kind of like wished they made the film just like the first two acts without kind of like putting their own personal opinions into it. I get it, like you're a filmmaker and you're always going to have your personal opinion in your just personally the way that you feel about something in your project. I get that. But at the same time, you then can't be surprised that people are saying, oh, this is that, as in like this is a blasphemous film, when that's your message. Do you get what I'm saying? So that's why I'm like, damn.
Yeah.
If I'm just, when it comes to being surprised and being like surprised when people are calling your project blasphemous.
They knew what they were doing, right? Like they're not shocked that people would be upset about this, especially in 1979. And I think we do need to put this into its historical context. In 1979, just open criticism of religion was much more taboo. Like this is really something that changed in the 2000s, right? Up until that point, it was basically impossible to criticize religion at all in any way. That started changing, I would say, in the 90s. And then from the 2000s onwards, kind of there was like a tipping point where it became much easier and there were no real repercussions for you. But if you did it in the 70s, that's where it got dicey. And that, I think that explains the reaction that this movie had, which is that people were just shocked that somebody would say something like this, as opposed to taking issue with the specifics of what was being said, right? I think today people would engage more with what was actually being said and less with the idea that somebody would make a satire about religion or the life of Jesus or whatever, right? I think that is why it was so controversial, and that is why it was protested so strongly, and that is why it was banned in so many places for so long.
But isn't there a contradiction in kind of what they did here, where they looked at the religion, they looked at Jesus, they looked at God, and couldn't really find any fault in it, but then you kind of find fault in the people that are following it, in a sense that, you know, again, what sort of Jonathan's referring to, where, you know, he's kind of addressing the mass crowd and they're all kind of in unison. But if it's in unison for something that even they themselves have looked at and said, okay, like this kind of is positive, this kind of checks out, and there isn't anything like, you know, really bad or taboo inside there, and people are following it for their own personal faiths, then what's the point of like trying to satire how the crowd react to it? And, you know, I'm not religious, but I know that everyone has their own kind of personal walk with God, or like, you know, whoever they believe in. And it looks different for everyone, and it like transpires kind of differently for everyone. Like some people are believers but don't go to the church and like have their own whatever. Some people want to spread the message and like, you know, be out there like speaking to everyone about it, etc., etc. Sometimes people can like people interpret like things differently all the time. And it's like yeah, I get you can kind of like make a joke of like, you know, everyone's in unison, or like maybe like some people are hypocrites over certain things, or like this, that, and the other, but it still feels like you're blasphemous and it's still like personally attacking people, which isn't, and especially with something that is important to someone, like to the level that religion is important to like individual people in you know, in their lives. I really feel like, you know, it's not something to joke about. And and I'm the type of person that you can make a joke about anything. Like I'm normally quite a relaxed person about sort of most jokes, but I don't know. It just feels like there's just like something wrong about trying to take the piss out of someone, something that someone like really cares about like so much. And like I get there's like stereotypes in like, you know, movies do it all the time, like, you know, the nerd or the jock or whatever like that, and there's like stereotypes that fit into like everything, and like religion isn't exclusive of it. But it's hard to explain because I'm not a religious person, but it just feels wrong in my fun.
That's the thing, right? I don't think it actually attacks people for, it doesn't call them hypocrites, and it doesn't attack people for believing, I don't think. I think we know in this case that Brian is in fact not a messiah, and the crowd is incorrect for identifying him as one, right? And it's basically pure chance that the crowd latches onto him as opposed to one of the other street preachers, right? My view is you could remake this movie, strip out the religion angle completely, and make it about fandom, for instance, where people just get caught up in being part of a group and being really into an idea, and then losing all perspective and all common sense. And I think that is what's being satirized here. It's not the contents of any teachings, and it's not the contents of anybody's belief. It is kind of how the crowd kind of loses itself once they really get into the idea that he's the Messiah, and that is exemplified in the sort of thing where as he tries to get away from the crowd, he loses a sandal, and people immediately come up with ideas for what that means, and how that is like a lesson for how Brian wants people to live their lives, right? And like they immediately have schisms over it, and like this minor detail that has no meaning by itself is identified as having meaning, and it kind of leads to people kind of forming teams that fight each other. In this case, over nothing.
I do agree with the whole removing the religion angle and doing doing it from like a fandom perspective.
I'm just saying what it's satirizing is obviously in the context of religion, right? Like there's no denying that.
Yeah.
But I think it taps into something that's a little bit more universal to human psychology, which is when people kind of lose themselves in their passions and and latch onto ideas and stop thinking about it. That is kind of what he means when he says you're individuals who should think for yourselves. That doesn't mean believe what I'm like. He's specifically not telling them what to think, right? He's just cautioning people against kind of getting caught up in this frenzy.
It's hard to see it like that, take it as that, when I'm seeing something else at face value.
One of the pieces to support of this is that Jesus is not in this movie, right? He appears twice in the background, and they are not specifically lampooning anything real. They're not attacking. There's not like a South Park episode that calls Christians stupid. You know what I mean? It's a different kind of thing.
Like I said, the first 2 acts I thought was good.
That's the part that's not about religion. I actually want to talk about that too, but like that part has very little to do with religion.
Exactly, which is why, like, one of the reasons why I really enjoyed it, because okay, thank God they're not, it's not going to be just like another a Bible bashing type of show. Of course, there's biblical events that's happening, but at the same time, it's not coming from a disgusting place. It's coming more, they're bantering around with the environment of what it was like during that time and playing around with that while you said, there is messaging behind it.
So it's funnier when it's attacking somebody else and not the thing you care about. Because I actually think the other part of it, which we'll get to in a minute, is much more scathing and much more personal than the religious stuff.
That's a good point, and I'm not gonna disagree with that whatsoever. What you're saying is fair, but it depends, because like you can still take the piss out of me. Like, for example, like one big thing that men always do is roast each other. And you know what I'm saying? Like, we roast each other all the time. So it's not that. And there's certain things that you're roasting me about that is personal, but there's just certain things that there's just certain levels that you can go when it comes to roasting someone, and we know certain levels not to cross. So it's not that you can't it's not that you can't mock me for something that I find personal to me. It's just, you know what I'm saying? Like, what level of personal is this is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's universal for many people. It's not just something where it's a Christian thing, or, you can take the piss out of everyone else, just don't take the piss out of us. I don't think that's that at all. I think there's just certain level of disrespect that everyone has and everyone knows.
But is it that personal? Because if you don't do the things that the mob does in this movie, is it still personal? Because what did it attack that you believe in?
It's not that it attacked it. For me, it's more so that the opinion that it shared. That's why I said I disagreed with the opinion. The whole thing about live life for yourselves, you don't have to follow.
It just says think for yourself, make up your own mind about what you believe.
Yeah, but that's clearly against Christianity, because we follow, especially in the context of the way that it was said, because we follow God, and obviously He's saying think for yourselves. You don't have to follow whatever you don't have to follow. So that's clearly a shot at us as Christian.
It's not like in the movie he said, don't follow the crowd or like whatever. And like I get the whole like think for yourself aspect of it can be tied to that, but I don't know. It feels like myself and Jonathan kind of came to the same conclusion when looking at that. So how well of a job did they really do to try and like distinguish here? It kind of feels like they were like playing on the line, which is kind of fine, but I think it's more about how many people think you're on this side of the line compared to the other. And like I kind of feel like, and I can't speak for everyone, but for the ones on this conversation here, is that I took it the same way as Jonathan when I was like seeing it in terms of the message behind kind of what he was saying, especially like in a movie where he's not Jesus, but he's almost like being seen as Jesus in the eyes of the public. It's kind of given that vibe.
Like, think about it, Daniel, because if he said it anywhere else, if he said it on a football pitch, think for yourselves, I'm not going to take it as you saying, don't follow, like, you know what I'm saying, religion is a scam, or religion is it's false. Like, of course, like, it's just based on where he was and based on the context of everything and what's being said, and obviously his situation is like, okay, it's hard not to take it that way.
All right. I just do think it does make a big difference that they don't attack the contents of anybody's belief. They're just criticizing our way of behaving. But okay, I think we've said our piece to that. The majority of the movie, like probably more than half, is a critique of leftist political activism. You've got the Roman occupation, and then you've got these resistance movements, and you've got the famous scene of the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea. And there are all these little groups that kind of are trying to achieve the same thing, which is to kick the Romans out of Judea, right? And they have all these big speeches about imperialism and oppression and all of that, but ultimately they very rarely do anything, right? They have their committees and they have their debates and they vote on resolutions, and that's kind of what it is, right? Like they don't even rescue Brian in the end when he's on the cross being killed for doing what they asked him to do as part of their group, right? I think that is much more scathing, or more scathing at least, because that is, I think, is like a broad spectrum attack on just the kind of person that gets involved in like protest movements and like these kinds of political causes, where this thesis of the movie basically is that they are so in love with being revolutionaries that they never actually get around to the revolution. So any thoughts on that? Like how did that come across to you when you as you were seeing it?
Speaking of funny moments in this movie, I think just kind of like quickly touching it, I think that was like one of my other like funny moments when like the guy that wanted to be a woman and the like discussing like the rights to give birth or something like that, where like logically you can't give birth, but actually, you know, I'm gonna fight for my right to give birth, even though like logically I can't give birth, which
My
was
right as a man to be a woman.
that one. Yeah, my right is meant to be a woman because he wants to give birth and this and the other, and it was like, okay, that's
and then they respect it. They call him Loretta from that point on, and they refer to each other as siblings, not brother and sister.
This movie was a little bit ahead of its time, to be fair.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's a movie a little bit ahead of its time when it comes to that. I do agree with you, and I can see, you know, the elements of it where it's like really kind of critiquing these people that want to be part of the revolution, etc. I think a little bit kind of went over my head because I wasn't like really into the movie, and I wasn't like kind of really like digging and vibing into the movie. But you could see the elements of how they were, you know, kind of like mocking these people and like mocking these like ideological beliefs, and like, you know, how they can never like really, they never really know what they're actually fighting for, and then like there's so many different like causes that they're trying to fight for, and this and the other, and everything kind of gets like muddled up by the end of it, and no one really ever like knows kind of what the real focus is at certain times in the movie. We're kind of comparing it to the religion aspect of it, because I think you, in your part, you said it was a lot more scathing than, you know, the religious side of it.
I'd say it's more personal, because here they're just outright calling them useless idiots, whereas on the religion side, they are much more specific about what it is they're criticizing, I think. It's not a general swipe at religion, right? It's saying, okay, we have a very specific thing we want to criticize, which is kind of the mob mentality and people making a big deal out of small things. Like, I believe slightly differently than you do, but fundamentally we do believe the same thing, but that makes us different, and that makes you a heretic or whatever, right? Like, that's the very specific thing they're criticizing in the religion part of this. But I think they are just broadly calling activists useless, right? Like, it seems more like a general swipe.
I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree with that. I can see how that's more personal. Is it as bad? Okay, so
It's basically calling them all useless idiots, right? Because like they even have the scene of like there's this famous scene of what have the Romans ever done for us, and they keep listing things like aqueducts and medicine and education and roads, and the streets are safer now. But aside from that, what have the Romans ever done for us, right? Which is honestly, like, if you take that scene at face value, it's kind of apologetics for imperialism. It's like literally the at least the trains run on time now kind of reasoning. But it's not supposed to take the side that imperialism is good if benefits come with it. It's supposed to take the side that the people who, or these specific kinds of people, don't think their beliefs through, and they kind of stumble very quickly when challenged. And that is kind of what they're doing in that "What have the Romans ever done for us" scene. I think that's the point that's being made there.
yeah.
Which is a pretty specific and pretty direct attack, right? And I just find this interesting because Monty Python has this reputation for being the one about religion, but only about a third of it is about religion, and 2/3 about it is about how leftist activism is useless. And I don't think that, like, it's not like this is a secret, right? Like, this is, like, everybody knows the whole People's Front of Judea scene and all of that, so this is not hidden. But I feel like it kind of gets left behind a little bit in the conversation, or in how people think about this movie. And just watching it again, I'd not seen it in a few years. And this time, it was really apparent to me about how much of it is not about religion at all, and instead about this seemingly unrelated thing that's actually not unrelated, because it's again about people being caught up in bad thinking, right? And being enamored with their ideas, so they lose sight of what's actually important, right? Like the mob in that thinks Brian is the Messiah thing, like has no beliefs really, right? Like they don't really have like what's the moral code of the mob, right? There isn't one. Brian doesn't have any teachings in this. He's not really telling people what to do. They just follow his instructions. But like when he says go get some of these berries over there, they just rush to the berries and just grab as many as they can simply because he told them to. But outside of that, he doesn't really tell them anything, right? And they just are looking for any meaning they can and for any content of their beliefs that they can get their hands on. But it's not really about that, right? It's like what are the morals of that crowd, right? There aren't really any, because the only thing they care about is belonging to the group and being caught up in this fervor. Similarly, the revolutionaries are so in love with being revolutionaries that they forget to solve any problems. And I think that's kind of two sides of the same coin. And I think that's really what the movie is about.
So then, in terms of like the reputation of the movie and why it's kind of, and it kind of a little bit goes back to what I was saying about how religion's just like that little bit more personal and that little bit more, attuned to sort of kind of oneself, is that it has that reputation about being about religion more so because it touches a nerve a little bit more, as opposed to, this kind of like left versus right debate that's been kind of happening for years and years and years and years, where it's, people do like believe in their like political stance and they believe in like, certain things. And sometimes sometimes you might find that like people waver in terms of, they might, situation might change and then they might like start leaning this way or the other. And not so that, people religion don't do that either as well. It just seems like, and I know it's like mocking like the leftists, but you can almost see it as like, oh, it's the right attacking the left again. And it's just like another way that they're doing that, as opposed to it like, the religion aspect where it's like a lot more personal and it's like a lot less, I don't know, left versus right, but more, you're attacking my personal beliefs, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, but then they don't do it, right? It doesn't actually come to that. I think the reaction to this, I think the reason this was controversial was not really because of anything that was being said. It's about the fact that it was being said at all. That somebody would make a movie in this style about this topic. Like it's not like people said, okay, let's hear what you have to say. And then a scene comes that is so outrageous that people start protesting. People started protesting this before they had seen it. And they simply didn't want people to see it. Like that's why, and that is because in 1979, this was so unusual and so taboo. That is why that it got that reaction, not because of anything specific that's in the movie, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that at the time, that whole religion aspect was more personal and was more sensitive than the whole left and right debate where we've had governments for X amount of time, and people have been having this like left versus right debate. So this is just like another proxy or like another like addition on top of that, which is why I think it has the reputation it has about like the religion aspect of it. And I think why it was like so heavily protested and people were so against it, just because when you kind of think of like things that are important to self, I don't know, religion kind of holds a different level compared to political beliefs, and depending on who you ask, one might be more important than the other. But I don't know, it's just like you're saying, is that for its time and at the time of it, it was a little bit more sensitive on the religion side of things. If you make it today, I think people probably care more about like the political side of it. You could probably do the same movie over again and people would probably lean more towards like the political side of it, just because of like the climate that we're in, and things being like a little bit like the society being a little bit less religious, etc. And there being other stuff happening. And I think like the whole like political landscape that we're currently in at the moment is probably a little bit more fierce than what it was before. So I think it's just more of like a time period thing.
People are less religious overall than they were in 1979. And also this is a post-South Park, post-Book of Mormon world, right? So people are much more used to the idea, but this kind of blazed the trail, I think. And that's kind of my point, that just the fact that somebody was doing it at all was the scandal. And that kind of like, I've not seen any mention anywhere of like leftist organizations boycotting this movie or taking offense at it or trying to ban it or anything. Like I've not seen this, right? Like anywhere. And that seems kind of out of proportion to me when you look at what the movie's actually saying and what it spends time on.
I think it's a time thing. Let this come out in present day.
I think that's a good point. I think the reaction would be reversed probably if that came out today. At least, like, depending on what circles you run in. Like, if you run in left-leaning circles, it would be seen as a right-wing hit job, probably. And if you're running in right-wing circles, it would probably be celebrated and propped up and probably even exaggerated in terms of how good it is or whatever. Like, I think it would absolutely be kind of hijacked into that ecosystem if it came out today. That's true. All right. Any other thoughts on Life of Brian? Any moments, any scenes that kind of stood out, that surprised you?
I was semi disappointed that they didn't do the whole he died and then he come back 3 days later. I was kind of half disappointed by that. And then again, like, you shouldn't take the piss out of religion or whatever like that. But I don't know, it just seemed like set up for it for whatever reason, just for like kind of like the crowd reaction that they were going for. And it didn't happen. I was like, oh, fair, we're at the end of the movie. I was also relieved that we was at the end of the movie by that point as well. But I was just like, oh, it'll be interesting to kind of see how like they play that out.
That's kind of the thing, that he's not the Messiah, right? He's not Jesus. And in the end, it kind of ends on an existential note, right? Like, his death is completely meaningless, right? He dies for a crime he didn't commit, and his death will not make a difference. And there's no, like, on either side, there's no consequences to it, right? And then the people who are dying on the crosses are kind of just singing a song about finding the bright side of life. Just try to find the happiness you can, because that's all the meaning you're gonna get. It's kind of how that ends.
Yeah. I kind of skipped the last song secretly. I was like, because they started singing and I don't want to hear this. So I skipped it to see how long they sing for, and they sang for a little bit too long, and I was like, I'm not listening to this. Yeah.
But you kind of got the gist of it, right? Like, it's like you don't need to listen to the whole song for it to make its point. Like, this whole thing about how, like, one of the guys is just wants to hold the cross for a guy to help him out, and he ends up being put on the cross himself. Like, that's just extra pointless. Like just one small moment can completely ruin your life, and there's no reason for it. You didn't deserve it. There's no greater scheme. It just happens.
You know what's funny? Actually, the big no scene. I don't know why I found that so funny, but that guy was consistent throughout the movie. Even at the end, he was still making friends, homeless friends. Well, yeah, that scene for me, that was funny. That's why I got into the film a bit.
All right. Any last words about Life of Brian? So I'm getting from this, however, it's like the second or third best comedy, but no better.
Second or third is very generous. Could this be the worst comedy I've ever seen in my life?
See, I don't see how, like, even if you just don't like it on a taste level, I don't see how you can call this the worst comedy. Like the worst comedy in the world does not have this kind of staying power, and it's being quoted almost 50 years later.
But it's personal. It's subjective. The movie told you to think for yourself, and I'm thinking for myself, Daniel. I'm thinking for myself, and
which is great. But then answer me this: why is this capturing people's imagination 50 years later if it's that bad?
No, okay. So when I say it's the worst comedy of all time, I'm talking about personal. Like I like again, like I kind of like caveated it at the start by saying it's not for me, and other people like really like this style of comedy, and it's for them. I'm saying for myself, and I'm really having to like think about this and trying to think about like some of the bad comedies I've seen, because I don't think I've ever, and I think in other situations I've had like the ability to kind of like switch it off, so I've not kind of had to enjoy a full movie of like, you know, comedy that I'm just like not really vibing with.
Like, if you think this is the worst comedy, like you should watch some of the Scary Movie movies. Because those are just, first of all, like, whether or not they're funny or not is subjective, right? But they're just completely incoherent pieces being held together by barely a plot, right? And here, for instance, like, there's like a very clear through line through this, right? And things build on top of each other, and things get, you know, pay off from one scene to the next, and they carry over from one scene to the next. And like, it's not just random wackiness, right? Like, there's little episodes like the haggling scene, which probably not essential. It's just funny by itself, where he tries to buy a beard so he can hide from the Romans, and the merchant is offended that he would not haggle. Like, that scene does not really have to be there, but it's kind of how he gets kind of this gird that becomes a holy relic 2 scenes later, and it kind of carries over. And like, Brian's characterization is pretty consistent throughout, and there's never like a scene where somebody is out of character just for the sake of a joke. The jokes are enabled by the characters and by the plot, right? Like even this whole stupid thing about the Roman centurion correcting Brian's Latin grammar. That's like a very standalone joke that doesn't really, like, as a joke, does not really connect to anything else in the movie. But it's how Brian gets into the resistance movement, and the fact, like, that is picked up in later scenes when Pilate is outraged by the amount of gravity or vandalism that's out there, and that causes him to crack down more, and that leads to the crucifixions, and that leads to Brian being caught up in this, and that leads to the final scene. So I think just as a story, as a movie, I think even if you don't like the jokes, you can kind of see how it's well crafted. And if something doesn't hang together, like the whole alien sequence where Brian falls off a rooftop and is just picked up by aliens who then crash land 30 seconds later, like, that is supposed to be a non sequitur, right? But it's kind of and that's kind of made funnier because it's the only thing in the movie that is completely random. Everything else is kind of grounded in the story and in the characters, I think. And so I think on that level, that I think makes it by itself a well-crafted comedy.
Can I just say something? I think I understand where you're both coming from. I just think I think it just falls down to what you find funny and what you don't. Even if it's a thing where the story makes sense in comparison to others. I know Daniel compares Scary Movie to this movie. It's just one of them ones where it's just personal taste. I just think it's one of them ones. But like I said, I do understand where you're coming from, Daniel, but still for some people it's a thing where it's like, I hear that. Yeah, cool, the story's well crafted, but it's just not for me.
And you're not right or wrong for liking or disliking this. And I do think you need to distinguish between it's a bad movie and I didn't enjoy this movie. I think there is a difference.
Yeah, Dan. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. Like I'm for sure not saying it's. I think because I'm like so strong on what I'm saying, you're kind of like taking this from me saying it's a terrible movie, and I don't know why other people don't like it. I'm just saying it's just not my cup of not my cup of tea. And in terms of like my preference, like. And again, like Jonathan was saying, it could be like well crafted. It could like have these like things that connect through and stuff like that. But if I'm just like not, but and if like the majority of it is about the comedy, and I'm not enjoying the comedy, I'm not going to enjoy like anything else. I want like enjoy the small details behind it. But again, I kind of like say again, it's like my opinion is it's terrible. But I understand like how other people will like the comedy, will like kind of like the story, will kind of have like their quotables from this, and like really get a kick out of it. It's just I just had a bad time with this.
I was gonna say two things. First thing I was gonna say, Daniel, now you know how I felt when you guys were killing me for Barbarian. Flipping out. That movie that killed me. But the second thing, I don't necessarily agree with that. I understand where you're coming from when you say it, but at the same time, bad movies are subjective. I don't think there's one truth when it comes to what a good movie is and what a bad movie is. So that's why I hear what you're coming from, but at the same time, I don't agree with it because even though to you it's well crafted, to someone else it might be like, no. To me, I don't think this is well crafted at all. Like for whatever reason.
And it could be argued as well. It's like kind of when Daniel's mentioning about how like kind of one scene plays into another, and like how one joke is a little bit inconsequential, but actually the relic from one joke kind of carries over. I don't argue against it because I can see it, and I can sort of recognize it in the movie. But in terms of like it's more the weighting of the score that you attribute to it in the type of movie that you're watching it, where kind of like Daniel's giving this like props for all of these things, where it's like for me, I don't care about. Like I can see it, I can appreciate it. For this particular movie, I don't care about it. In a different type of movie, if it's like more of a drama or a thriller or something else, I might give it a little bit more weighting in the scoring essentially. But I think in this particular movie, kind of the good points that Daniel's mentioning, it's like it does nothing for me. Like I'm not giving the extra points for that when I don't find it funny. If the comedy's good, you get additional points for all those extra things that you're adding on top of it. Whereas if the comedy's bad, then I kind of don't care about everything else that you're doing anyways.
Let's keep it at that. Any other last thoughts before we wrap it up?
For me, I'd say I like I said, I like the chunk of the movie. I just didn't like the ending. But it made me the performances did make me laugh. Brian especially, just his posh accent and him calling people bastards. It was funny. I found that funny, and you got
Bigosticus.
Yeah, him freaking hilarious. So yeah, man, there were things that I definitely liked. I don't understand why there was so much outrage. That was prior to me seeing, the last 20 minutes of the film. I didn't see it, so yeah. So that's why I was like, I was like, yo, this was a funny watch. Overall, I'm not mad at what I watched.
Yeah, so like for me, I think this is, I don't know if the best if the best comedy is a tall order, right? But I think this is just excellent. I think it's quotable. I think each scene has something kind of unique in it. Doesn't repeat itself all that much. Does a little bit, but it's not like the same joke over and over for 2 hours, right? Like it touches on a lot of different things. Like there's like each sequence kind of has its own thing going on. I think its point is a lot more nuanced than people give it credit for. Like I actually showed this a few years ago to a Catholic friend of mine who takes his religion quite seriously, and he walked into it a little bit apprehensive, thinking, "Oh no, what am I gonna show him this time?" And then he walked away with it being his favorite movie. It's kind of he had the exact opposite reaction to your survey, where it kind of just resonated with him for like on some level. And I think there's a reason for why this movie is still quoted 50 years later, and most people I think have heard at least some of the famous lines, even if they've never seen the movie. I think it's much more thoughtful and nuanced in its satire. And I think that's kind of one thing I want out of satire is my view is you can make a satire about anything, you just need to have a point. And this has a point, which you can disagree with, but it has one, which is more that can be said for a lot of other satires or comedies. And for that reason, I think it deserves its status as being top tier in movie history.
Okay, so it looks like we're gonna end it there. Guys, thank you very much for joining in today's philosophical debate.
If you reach this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate you pressing play, giving us a listen, and just in general rocking with us. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, then you should probably start thinking for yourself. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Alright, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today, and we will see you next time. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.